Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at how to create a 3D logo using an Adobe Illustrator file, which may contain shapes and text. What we're seeing on screen is basically a design that was produced as an Adobe Illustrator file and then imported into Maya and turned into a three-dimensional object. So we can also do this with things like AutoCAD drawing files, .dwg files. So we could take the plan of a building, for example, import those files into Maya, and then extrude the shapes using the vector information within those files. So you can actually produce 3D models of buildings by extruding out these two-dimensional files. Now Maya does have a text tool as well, which works in a very similar fashion. So what we're going to do really is focus on the Adobe Illustrator tool, because it kind of covers the same systems as the text tool as well, but it gives you the added option of being able to bring things in from Illustrator rather than just creating the text directly inside Maya, which is what the text tool will do. So let's jump across into Illustrator and just look at the file setup first. And then we'll come back over into Maya and we'll import the actual file. Okay, so yeah, you can see here we've got this file in Maya. Basically, this is made up of several different shapes. At the moment, these are all separated out, but technically speaking, we could connect them together by combining them, doing that kind of thing. But really, at the basic level, they're just going to be kind of separate when we bring them in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just save this file really quickly, and then we'll create a new file, jump across into Illustrator. Okay, so I've saved that. So I'm just going to create a new file for the time being. I'll pop the grid up so you can see that that's sort of a default one. And then we're going to jump across into Adobe Illustrator, which is just here. So here's the file that I will supply for you guys in its current form. Now I'm using an older version of Illustrator. This is like CS6, so this is the last version before they went to a subscription model. With the Creative Cloud versions of the software. The process is exactly the same. So you can do this in whichever version of Illustrator you've got your hands on. Okay, and so I'm going to use this older version to show that you can actually do that. There is a specific option that you do need to set with your files when you save them from Illustrator, and that's regardless of what version you're using. The process is going to be the same. Okay, so I'm going to start off, before I do this one, what I'm going to do is just a very basic shape similar to this. So this is just a star shape. So what I'm going to do is just create a file. I'll just go to New. Doesn't matter how big the file is, because Maya is not going to read the file size. Literally all it's going to do is read the actual lines that you place in the file. So as far as new documents go, it doesn't matter what you do. Now I'm going to just create a shape in here. It could be a rectangle, it could be any of these shapes. It does need to be a closed shape. That's the main trick with this, is that it can't be an open line. Okay. For instance, it can't be just a line like that. Okay, it has to be a closed shape. All right, so you've got to do it. You've got to actually close. If you're using like the pen tool to create, shapes like this, then it has to actually have a closed curve. Okay, so I can bring this in like this. Now, one of the things that I'm going to experiment with, by default, Maya will read the coordinates of this file. And what I mean by coordinates is every Illustrator file has its 0 position on the X and Y axes. This is two-dimensional. So it still has an X side-to-side axis and a Y up and down axis. So X is along the side-to-side along the page and Y is up and down. However, its 0 position is in the top left corner, up here. Now, technically speaking, if I bring the info panel up just here, you can see here we've got X and we've got Y. And when I place my cursor, if I hit the caps lock key, it'll give me a precise cursor, a precision cursor, which is just an X. If I place this right up in the corner, you can see up in the right-hand corner, up in the info, it's 0, 0. Now what this means is, when we import this file into Maya, this will be at the middle of the grid. So all of this is going to be below the grid and to the right by default. Okay. Now, before I export this, what I'm going to do is make an adjustment to this file so that we can see if it makes any difference in Maya. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and reset the center position, or this origin position, down here in the middle. And I'm going to see whether or not that impacts whether or not these shapes end up above the grid. Okay, if it does, it means that you can actually dictate where this is going to import into the scene a little bit in Maya, whether it's under the grid or over. So let's take a quick look at and see if this setting will change. What I want to do is look at the rulers. Okay, so I want to go to View and then down here to Rulers. And I want to select Show Rulers, Control R or Command R on a Mac. And that brings our rulers up. And you can see here, the top upper corner of the page, when we move up and down or side to side, we have these little dotted lines that indicate where our cursor is. Some here on the vertical and some here on the horizontal. So when I place my cursor here, over here I know that it's 0, 0. And I can see that those little dotted lines line up with 0 here and 0 here. This corner button just here, if I click and drag this, what it will do is reposition the 0 points of the page. So now the 0 point is here vertically and it's over here horizontally. So my 0 point is now here. Now what I'm hoping is that Maya will actually recognize that and therefore place these shapes around the origin just here. So these should be sort of above the grid and this one will be below. And it'll kind of be centered. That's sort of this 0 point is the only thing that Maya will recognize. It doesn't care how big the document is out this way or how big it is down here. So let's see if this works. Now Maya completely ignores color. It completely ignores the thickness of these path stroked lines. Okay, so what it's going to do is just literally bring in, if I hit Control or Command Y, this just shows me the wireframe. Maya will literally just bring these lines in. Okay, it completely ignores line thickness. Okay, now I'm going to make a modification to one of these shapes to increase the line thickness, and I'll show you how this works. If I want to actually bring in a thick line, okay, what I need to do is increase the stroke value up here to make the line thicker. Now, because this is just basically a virtual line, it's still going to only bring in the path, this wire shape, right? If I want it to bring in the thickness, I have to convert this shape to outlines. So what I do is come up to Object, and I come down to Path, and I select Outline Stroke. Like that. And now what it should do is bring these outlines in. Okay, now you can see here what's happened is it's actually left the original path there as well. If we leave that there, it'll bring that in too. But if we sort of ungrouped this shape, we could delete that middle line and it would just bring in the outlines. Okay, that's what I'm going to do with this example. So what we can do is go to Object, Ungroup, just here. And now if I select on this shape, you can see it doesn't select this inner path by itself, right? If I select this one, this is actually still a shape in and of itself, right? That's still there. So I can get rid of that one by deleting it. That still leaves me with this widened path. Okay, so that's a couple of little tricks in Illustrator. Now what we're going to do is save this. So what we're going to do is go to File, and we're going to select Save. Okay, it's going to pop up our normal dialog. And you can see here I'm actually in the scenes folder inside my project folder, my Maya project folder. Okay, because this is going to be Maya's going to treat this like an object. It's sort of treating it like almost like a scene file itself, right? Even though it's an Adobe Illustrator format. Okay, so if it's going to be a shape that you're bringing into Maya from Illustrator, put it into the scenes folder. That's where Maya is going to look for it. Don't put it into the source images folder where you would put your textures. Okay, you'll then have to manually kind of navigate into here. Okay, so we want to leave it as an Adobe Illustrator, a .ai, and we're just going to give this a name. So I'm just going to call this shape test and give it a version number. I should turn my caps lock off as well. And then what we're going to do is hit save. Now, when you hit save, Illustrator won't do anything except add the extension on the end if it's not there, .ai. So then what you need to do is press save again. It'll then pop this panel up. Okay, so unlike Photoshop, which basically will just save the file, Illustrator will ask you what options you want to have set. This is the important thing. If you want to take your Illustrator file into a 3D software, you need to change the version number at the top here. Now, I've done this in several different software packages like 3D Studio Max, Lightwave, and Maya, and I've had to do the same thing for each of those software packages. So it seems to be something to do with the Illustrator file format itself. If it's set to anything higher than version 8, it will not work. And that's in my experience. Okay, so what we do is we change the Illustrator version up here to version 8. So I think when they went to version 9, they changed something with the way that the file format was written, and that prevents it from being read properly by 3D software. So if you set it to version 8 and then hit OK, it's basically going to tell you it's saving as a legacy format. And it's going to edit disable some of the editing features. I think those features are what actually stops the format being read properly by 3D software. So version 8, I think, is more like just a very basic vector file. So version 8, hit OK. Now what we're going to do is jump across to Maya over here. And what we're going to do is on the Poly Modeling tab, just here, or under the Create menu, just here, Adobe Illustrator object, we have these icons. So I've got an icon here. I've added this onto the shelf myself by going to Create, holding down Shift and Command or Shift and Control on a PC, and clicking the actual Illustrator object option just here. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a quick look at the settings. So I'm going to hit the option box here. We have two options by default. The first one is curves, and the second one is bevel. So with curves, there are no settings. And I'm going to show you how to use this one. I'm going to use this one for the example, and then I'm going to show you how you can turn the curves into a 3D object using similar settings to these. The bevel option quite often doesn't work. It depends on the Illustrator file, what's in the file, what you've actually drawn. So sometimes I find that this is a bit more unreliable. Okay, but basically when you select bevel, it should import the file and turn it into a three-dimensional file to begin with. I'm going to attempt to do it here now to see if this file is going to work, and that way you can see sort of what it does. But if it doesn't, I'm going to show you the alternate version anyway, using the curve system, and then manually setting up a bevel on it. Okay, so basically what we have here is it'll create a three-dimensional object with an angled beveled edge around it. Okay, and that's what these bevel settings here are. If you turn these two off, what you get is just a flat sort of front and back on your text. It'll still be three-dimensional. It'll have a thickness which is controlled by the extrude distance. So the higher you make this number, the thicker the letters get, or the objects get, and it's based on the grid size. So if you set this to 1, the object or the text will come out as thick as one of these grid spaces. Okay, so I might just set that to 1 anyway, to make the text a bit thicker. So if you want just a flat normal front and back, you turn the bevels off at the top here. The cap is basically the front of the object or the letter, or the back of the letter, start and end. So if you just want sort of like the outside edges, then you would turn these off. Okay, but normally if you want 3D text, you want them on. And then these options down here dictate how the edges, if you're using the bevel options on, then you can say whether or not you want them angled or if you want the edges curved. Okay, but that's basically what this is. I'm going to leave these settings default except for the extrude distance, which is the thickness, and I'm going to increase that to 1 so you can see it a little more easily. So then what we do is we hit create, and it's going to take us straight into our scenes folder, which is why I was saying before to save it into there. There's my file, test shape, and I'm going to hit open. Actually, that's not the file, but you can see what it's done there. Okay, let me just get rid of that one, and let me redo that. It's actually shape test is what I wanted. There we go. So that one there has worked. Okay. Now, what didn't work was me repositioning the 0 point in the Illustrator document. It has completely ignored that. So over in Illustrator, where I moved the 0 value to here and here, Maya has not recognized that, and it's still taking the top corner as the origin over here. Okay. So you can see how that's dropped in underneath the grid. Okay, that's why. This is 0, 0 on here, and so it reads that as 0, 0 in 3D, which is the middle of the grid here. But these are just objects, so what we can do is we can just move them up into whatever position we want, like this. Now you can see over here in the outliner, it's created just these objects as an object. Okay, it hasn't set them up as separate pieces. They are all one combined object at the moment. You can see over here, it actually, to create these, it creates several different inputs. And one of them, the one that we need to take notice of, is the bevel plus, just here. This is the input which controls those settings we were looking at before, the bevel on the edge, the thickness, and so on and so forth, right? So this is the bevel. This is the bevel just here. So it's the angled edge. And that's what we can change the setting on to make it rounded or scoop in, or even make it kind of like a cylinder that runs right around the corner like this. Okay, so you can see there at a basic level, this gives us the shapes that we get in Illustrator. Okay, now you will notice that curves from Illustrator come out with a different kind of more jagged edge on it. If I pop over to the attributes, we can take a quick look at this bevel plus. This is basically where we get the settings for those curves, right? So for instance, if I don't want any bevels on the shape, I can turn these off. The start bevel is usually at the back, and you can see that that's removed the edge and it's nice and flat now. And the end is at the front. And that's because when it extrudes these, it starts at the back and extrudes forward. So that's the start, and then it ends up out here. So end bevel is the front, essentially. If we turn the cap off, so if I turn the end cap off, which is going to be this front, it will remove the front like that. Obviously, if you want 3D text, normally you want these on. You want at least the caps on, like I was saying before. Like this. Okay. Now we can separate these. They're just polygon objects. You can separate them and then, you know, do extrusions on them. You can add materials to them, all the usual thing. These are now, for all intents and purposes, just a polygon object. Okay. There are a couple of other things we can take a look at. If we come down to the polygon output options, we have this sampling option. The extrusion section dictates how many divisions run around the extrusion here. So if you only want a single section, you can drop this down to a value of 1, like this, and it will remove that middle line. keep in mind you do get these warnings sometimes depending on your shapes. Okay, the curve span here dictates how many divisions are along a single section of the curve that comes out of Illustrator. Basically the way it works is it brings the Illustrator file in as a curve, then it automatically extrudes them, and then it deletes the curves, removes the history, and combines it all together. So these edges here, which basically give us 6 polygons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is this number here. So if I reduce that number, we get fewer curves, or fewer segments, right? The problem there is if you've got a curved object like this, as you reduce the number, you lose the curve. If you increase the number, you get a smoother object, and obviously more polygons. So if you've got a shape that has a lot of curved sections and you want to keep that nice and smooth, you need to increase the curve span. The problem is where you've got things like triangles, just straight edges, you don't need multiple curves or multiple numbers. You could get away with just one. And so that's why the Bevel Plus tool, which this is based on, can be used independently on individual shapes that you bring in. So that's sort of how this system works. I'm going to do another video and I'm going to show you how you can bring just the curves in and then use Bevel Plus to individually extrude each curve. And that way you can adjust the amount of curve span numbers, this value here, to either reduce polygons on straight edges or increase the smoothness on curved edges. And that way you can kind of balance your scene a little bit better. And then we'll take a look, obviously, at sort of how you can manipulate the shapes and so on, just to kind of create a logo. So I'll leave this video here as a bit of a introduction. And in the next video, we'll actually put together one of these logos. So I'll see you in a minute.